Continuing on then, there's a section in here of questions and answers with the Dalai Lama, some of which I think can be very helpful. So I just want to touch on those a little bit to conclude today. So the first question is, what is the difference between Mahamudra and Dzogchen? Now, the way that I have been taught on this, they're often described as being the same. In fact, a lot of times they will include Madhyamaka or the middle way as being a third one that is also the same. There are some subtle differences between them. For example, Mahamudra does not have the equivalent of Togao practices, but it is almost identical to Trekcho. But there are some other things. So the Dalai Lama responds here and says that ultimately they're the same point. And in the initial stages, there are some differences in emphasis on them. And it's also possible to integrate the two. And oftentimes they are taught in exactly the same way. Oftentimes Mahamudra is taught in 4 stages, and a lot of times those same 4 stages are used to teach Dzogchen. You start off with a shamatha, advanced shamatha, then an advanced vipassana, and then the union of those two together, and then single taste. And so oftentimes both of those are taught in that same way. The next question, can a student objectively evaluate his or her own progress? He says that's definitely possible to do that, but you have to do a lot of study and learning. And then when you've learned enough, you can then evaluate your own progress. So you do have to spend some time and go into some depth before you can really accurately do that. The next question, can you please distinguish the terms Rigpa, wisdom, Yeshe, and clear light? They're often used in similar ways. And he responds that yes, context matters for these things, and that can result in different meanings as a part of this. And so he gives some examples of Rigpa and how it can be used in different ways, sometimes referred to as essential Rigpa, or Rigpa of the ground, or effulgent Rigpa, and so on. And then Rigpa is sometimes used to denote the essential aspect of the analysis of mind. And Rigpa also appears as a contrast between Rigpa and Ma-Rigpa, or awareness and ignorance, or between Sem, which is mind, and Rigpa, ordinary mind versus transcendent mind. The term Yeshe is often translated as primordial wisdom, and also has many different connotations. In a very basic way, we all inherent beings have this nature. It's often referred to even as our own Buddha nature. On the next page, he also says, I have found out it is essential to have a proper understanding of the different shades of meanings of these terms and of the way in which they can vary according to the context. It is essential for all serious practitioners. And it just takes some time to learn these things and develop an understanding of those nuances as we go along in our practice. It's not the kind of thing that you can get in one sitting. It just takes time to be exposed to lots of different contexts and to then understand those different contexts and so forth. The next question, what is the best way to practice, or what technique or attitude can be used to deepen the heart connection with Padmasambhava? And he responds, serious practice is the only way. So again, it takes practice and meditation. And so he talks a little bit about Dzogchen and so forth, but the essence of it is that you have to practice. So patience and persistence. The next question, how does an understanding of emptiness help you to realize compassion and loving kindness? And he responds, even intellectual understanding of emptiness will enable you to perceive the possibility of the cessation of suffering, or enlightenment. And then, if your conviction is strong enough, your compassion will be all the greater and more powerful. And so then we have the union of the wisdom and the compassion that actually is enlightenment. The next question, what if we feel an unbearable compassion for the suffering of other beings, yet we have not developed this wisdom to deal with it properly. And he responds, now that you have developed that feeling of unbearable compassion toward others, you should try to increase your wisdom and then put that ideal into practice. The next question, how can Dzogchen help us in our daily lives and careers? And the Dalai Lama responds here saying, that experience will give you the ability to prevent yourself from being overwhelmed by circumstances, good or bad. You will not fall into the extreme states of mind. You won't get overly excited or overly depressed or depressed. And then he says there is no attachment or agitation. You will feel tremendous ease and relief. You are not preoccupied by what arises in the mind, nor does it cause you any distress. You are free from conceptuality or any form of objectifying, allowing you to be free from being caught up in the play of emotions. Then the next question, is the fundamental innate mind of clear light dependent on causes and conditions? If it is not dependent, how can it be empty of independent existence? Now this goes back a little bit to that part of the discussion that he already gave, and his response is a little bit the same. In other words, well, it depends. Okay, so often in the text we find mention of the fundamental innate clear light, mind of clear light being not produced by causes or conditions. And that's kind of that ultimate point of view there. Certain texts speak of the activities of the Buddha as permanent and non-produced in the sense that they are continuous. That is, they have no beginning and they have no end, so they are permanent in that sense. In the same manner, the fundamental innate mind of clear light, in terms of its continuity, is beginningless and also endless. So it is not produced. It does not come into being as a result of circumstantial interaction of causes and conditions. So there's one view, okay, in how it is permanent. However, so this is the second view. This present instant of consciousness comes from its earlier moments. And we see that description in some of the sutras where you go moment by moment by moment. And then, so this is a state of awareness which will eventually turn into wisdom, the fundamental innate nature of clear light, and be maintained. So it is impossible for anything next line. So from this second point of view, the fundamental innate mind of clear light is causally produced. So it's going from moment to moment to moment, and it takes some effort to sustain that. And so that would be a cause in that sense. So in this case, it would be viewed as relative. In the other case, it would be viewed as ultimate. So again, multiple points of view. Next question, Lojong, Training the Mind in 7 Points, teaches relative conventional bodhicitta and absolute ultimate bodhicitta. How does Samattabhadra or primordial awareness fit into this teaching? So the Dalai Lama responds here, talking about emptiness again in the text, is not presented from a Dzogchen point of view. We'll talk about the Lojong. Yet a practitioner who has the understanding and experience of Dzogchen meditation can definitely integrate that into the practice of Lojong. Then the next question, why have you chosen to complete Dzogchen teachings with the empowerment of Padmasambhava? So at this teaching that is the source of this text, he did do the empowerment for Padmasambhava at the end of that. So the question is why? So he responds, there are certain prerequisites that should be met prior to engaging intensively in Dzogchen practice. These include empowerment into any of the deities of highest yoga tantra. And that's our standard in this particular Sangha as well, is that students need to have at least one highest yoga tantra empowerment. We don't necessarily require that everybody have the specific deity or the specific lineage and so forth. That's good and it's ideal, but we don't require it. And the common and uncommon preliminary practices of Dzogchen. So those would refer to the Korte-Rushin practices. So we receive a direct transmission or blessing for the practice of Dzogchen from a living master through receiving instruction on a text such as Yeshe Lama that we have been using in this series of teachings. And so Padmasambhava is a practice similar to Guru Yoga practice. And Dzogchen practice is a specific practice to Guru Padmasambhava's lineage. Because of this, he says he is giving the empowerment. So there's a connection there. The next question is, certain Nyingma masters have expounded Shintong, emptiness of other, as the view of Dzogchen. Do you agree with them? Why is Shintong such a controversial view among Tibetan Buddhist philosophers? And so he responds reciting Mipam Rinpoche and a commentary of the Sublime Continuum. And he says that you can combine the teachings of emptiness, of the second turning of the wheel, with the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. I mentioned that just a little bit earlier. And primordial purity is the main subject matter of the second turning, and spontaneous present is the main subject matter of the third turning. However, this does not mean that the emptiness spoken of in the second term is exactly the same as what Dzogchen terminology is called primordial purity. Now, primordial purity in Dzogchen refers to the Trekcho practices. But without an understanding of emptiness as expounded in the Wisdom Sutras, and without taking that understanding as a basis, there is no way that you can understand the primordial purity in the context of Dzogchen. So that is why we teach these things in a particular sequence. As for spontaneous presence, which in Dzogchen is associated with Togao, in Dzogchen, Tathagata Garbha, the essence of Buddha nature, or the innate mind of clear light, in the third turning of the wheel, there do seem to be divergent views on that, even among Nyingma meditators and scholars. So again, we find ourselves facing the wall here that is constructed out of these different points of view. On the next page, 166, he does give an example from Yoga Tantra, talking about rainbow body. We cannot say that this rainbow body is totally synonymous with what is spoken of as the illusory body in highest Yoga Tantra, yet at the deepest level it will come down to that illusory body, which is the pure illusory body. So they're really ultimately they're the same. And then he says the writings of Nyingma masters, Longchenpa, Jigme Lingpa, Mipam, mention the emptiness of other, but the reference is mainly to the fundamental innate mind, or Rigpa. This innate mind is emptiness of other that is devoid of circumstantial conceptual thought processes. It's that direct experience. And that's totally different from emptiness of other, which was refuted by other Tibetan masters of the past, according to this. There is a tradition of making distinction between two different perspectives on the nature of emptiness, one through philosophical analysis, understood in terms of the non-affirming negative phenomena, and that's pretty much the Prasangika approach that's being used, but not exclusively. And then on the other hand, the view of experience, or direct experience, understood more in terms of an affirming negation, that is saying what it is, or the lack of what it is. Another reason for this difference is, this is at the bottom of the page, that in the practice of sutra and the lower three classes of tantra, the wisdom derived through special insight into emptiness is always contemplative, analytical state of mind. Whereas in highest yoga tantra, the subjective mind employed in perceiving emptiness has the nature of a spontaneous experience of great bliss, which serves the purpose of analysis. So it's just that state of being rather than a conceptual analysis. So this is the ultimate analysis reference that he made a little bit earlier. So rather, Rigpa is directly introduced, and that is the view that is maintained. This is not an analytical process. Rigpa is utterly relaxed. There's no focusing of the attention. Consciousness simply rests without engaging in any kind of analysis. So the next question, can you relate any examples of the experience of clear light? And the Dalai Lama says there are different degrees of subtlety in your experience of clear light. In Dzogchen terminology, distinguishes between two: dissolution due to the influence of liberation and dissolution due to the influence of confusion. Okay? So a distinction is between the ground and the appearances of the ground. What is the real thing and what is our idea of the real thing, if you will. So appearances of the ground dissolve in one in two ways: dissolution due to the influence of liberation, or dissolution due to the influence of confusion. The former refers to dissolution through the power of yoga practiced as the path. The latter refers to the dissolution that takes place automatically at the time of death. That's a little bit different than what I mentioned. Depending on the extent to which the dissolution process has taken place, there can be different degrees of the experience of clear light. And oftentimes when we look at the discussions of the Bardo experience of clear light, for someone who has no experience doing these practices, it is said that we simply don't even recognize the clear light, even though we experience it. Whereas somebody who has done the practices, the more practice and the longer you can sit in a sustained experience of Rigpa, the longer that experience is going to be in the Bardo, and consequently that's going to increase your opportunity for recognizing it, and if you do, at that moment you will achieve enlightenment. Anyway, getting back to the text here, the whole point is to arrive through practice at the ultimate experience of clear light. When that ultimate experience of clear light takes place, all other types of consciousness are dissolved. But one question which is not settled or certain yet is whether or not a very subtle functioning of the brain might still be present in that state. You know, and that's one of those issues that is being researched, and we don't have a certain answer. Of course, scientists, brain scientists in the West assume that that is in fact the case, whereas traditionally in the Buddhist tradition we have assumed that that is not the case. So the last question then is, do sentient beings have free will? That's even a question among Western scientists. But the Dalai Lama says, according to Buddhism, individuals are masters of their own destiny, and all living beings are believed to possess the nature of primordial Buddha Samattabhadra, the potential or seed for enlightenment within them. So our future is in our own hands. What greater free will do we need?